Colorado Territory, 1872. Dust clouds billowed across the horizon where the vast prairie met the towering Rocky Mountains. In this unforgiving landscape, where nature and man competed in shows of brutality, 25-year-old Gabriel Rafferty believed one thing with absolute certainty. A man survives the frontier alone. Partnerships were temporary, friendships were liabilities, and love was a fatal distraction. Gabe, as most folks called him, had watched his father die defending their small homestead from rustlers when he was just 16. His mother had followed shortly after, her heart too broken to continue. Since then, he'd learned to depend only on himself, his Winchester rifle, and his dun-quarter horse named Scout. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with wheat-colored hair and eyes the sharp blue of a winter sky, Gabe had rejected more than one proposition from ranch daughters and saloon girls alike. His handsome features, usually wearing a few days' worth of light stubble, rarely softened into a smile. A man who lets down his guard dies just as quick as a man who never had one, he often told himself while riding the lonely trails between the scattered towns where he picked up work as a hired hand. For the past 2 seasons, he'd been working at the Circle R Ranch outside of Silverdale, breaking horses and helping with cattle drives. The owner, Henry Milton, had taken a liking to the solitary young man, offering him steady work and even hinting that Gabe might one day take over as foreman. But Gabe kept everyone at arm's length, even the kind-hearted Milton family. He did his job, earned his pay, and avoided entanglements. Deep down, what he wanted was enough money to buy his own small spread, a place where he could be completely self-sufficient. What he failed to recognize was his soul's hunger for connection, the empty ache that woke him in the cold hours before dawn when the lonely howl of coyotes echoed his own isolation. On a blistering July afternoon, Gabe was riding back to the Circle R after delivering a message to a neighboring ranch. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes from the glare. Scout's ears suddenly pricked forward, alert to something Gabe couldn't yet detect. Years of frontier survival had taught him to trust the animal's instincts. He loosened his Colt in its holster and scanned the horizon. That's when he saw it, a small covered wagon tilted at an awkward angle about a half-mile ahead, one wheel clearly broken. As he approached, he spotted movement. A young woman in a dusty blue traveling dress was struggling to unhitch a panicked horse from the wagon traces while simultaneously trying to calm the frightened animal. Gabe hung back for a moment, wary of a trap. Outlaws sometimes used women as bait to lure unsuspecting travelers, but when the horse reared, nearly trampling the woman, his instincts took over. He spurred Scout forward, closing the distance rapidly. "Stand clear, miss," he called out, swinging down from his saddle in one fluid motion. He grabbed the horse's bridle, speaking in low, soothing tones while firmly bringing the animal under control. Only when the horse had settled did Gabe turn to look at the woman. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 20, with honey blonde hair that had come loose from its pins to frame a heart-shaped face. Despite the trail dust, her complexion was fair, with a small scattering of freckles across her nose. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, regarded him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice cultured but shaky. "I believe you may have saved my life." "You're a long way from anywhere," Gabe observed, still keeping a careful distance. "Traveling alone." A shadow crossed her face. "My driver abandoned me when the wheel broke, said he couldn't afford the delay and that Silverdale was just a few miles ahead. He took his horse and left me to manage." Gabe frowned. No decent man would leave a young woman alone on the frontier. That's no way to treat a lady. Silverdale's still a good 10 miles from here. "I'm Amelia Evans," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I'm terribly grateful for your assistance, Mr. Rafferty, Gabriel Rafferty." He touched his hat brim instead of taking her hand, maintaining the emotional distance he always kept. "What brings you to these parts, Miss Evans?" Her eyes darted away briefly. "I'm to take a position as a schoolteacher in Silverdale." Something about her response struck Gabe as rehearsed, but it wasn't his concern. "Well, you won't be teaching anyone today. That wheel's beyond repair and it'll be dark soon. The Circle R Ranch is about 4 miles back. I can take you there for the night, and tomorrow we can send someone for your belongings." Relief washed over her face, quickly replaced by hesitation. "I wouldn't want to impose. Mrs. Milton's not one to turn away a lady in distress." Gabe began gathering the few items he could carry on Scout. "What's most important in your luggage?" As Amelia identified a carpetbag and a small trunk, Gabe noticed her hands trembling slightly. She was frightened, and not just from the wagon accident. He helped her gather her most essential belongings, then secured them to Scout's saddle. "You'll have to ride with me," he said, trying to sound matter-of-fact about an arrangement that suddenly made him uncomfortable. "Scout can carry us both to the ranch." Amelia nodded, her posture stiff with tension. Gabe mounted first, then reached down to lift her up behind him. She settled awkwardly, clearly trying to maintain a proper distance despite their circumstances. "You'll need to hold on, Miss Evans. The trail gets rough in places." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hands lightly at his waist. As they began to move, the horse's gait forced her to tighten her grip, and Gabe found himself acutely aware of her presence. The light floral scent that somehow persisted despite the dust and heat, the tentative pressure of her hands, the occasional brush of her skirts against his leg. They rode in silence for a time before Amelia spoke. "You've been very kind, Mr. Rafferty. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "Just happened to be passing by," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not the driver who abandoned me," she said quietly. Gabe had no response to that. The woman behind him was a complication, one he'd deliver to the Circle R and then keep his distance from. The last thing he needed was to get tangled up in whatever had brought this clearly educated Eastern woman to the Colorado territory. People didn't come to these parts without a reason, and in his experience, the prettier the package, the more dangerous the contents. As they approached the ranch, Amelia's grip tightened momentarily. "Mr. Rafferty," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of Scout's hoofbeats, "I would be grateful if you would simply say I was in a wagon accident. There's no need to mention that I was abandoned." Gabe frowned. "Why's that?" I simply don't want to begin my new position with people pitying me or thinking I'm somehow unlucky." It was a reasonable enough request, though Gabe suspected there was more to it. Still, it wasn't his place to question her. "As you wish, Miss Evans." The main house of the Circle R came into view, a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows against the approaching dusk. Martha Milton stepped onto the porch as they rode into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. A plump, motherly woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray-streaked dark hair, she raised her eyebrows at the sight of Gabe returning with a woman. "Mrs. Milton," Gabe called out as he helped Amelia dismount, "this is Miss Amelia Evans. She had an accident with her wagon on the way to Silverdale, broken wheel. I thought perhaps she could stay the night." Martha's face immediately softened with concern. "Of course, dear, you must be exhausted. Come inside right away." She turned to Gabe. "Thank you for bringing her here. I'll have one of the boys take care of your horse." As Martha ushered Amelia toward the house, the young woman glanced back at Gabe. "Thank you again, Mr. Rafferty. I'm truly in your debt." Gabe merely nodded, already planning to retreat to the bunkhouse and the simpler company of his fellow ranch hands. But as he watched Amelia disappear into the house, he felt an unfamiliar twinge of curiosity. There was something in those green eyes, something haunted that he recognized all too well. He shook his head to clear it. Whatever her secrets, they weren't his concern. In this harsh territory, a man stayed alive by minding his own business and keeping his guard up. Amelia Evans was now the Miltons' problem, and tomorrow she'd be on her way to Silverdale to start her new life, whatever that entailed. But as Gabe led Scout toward the stable, he couldn't shake the feeling that his orderly, solitary existence had just been disrupted in ways he couldn't yet understand. Amelia sat stiffly at the Milton family's dining table, acutely aware of being an unexpected guest. Martha Milton had been nothing but kind, providing her with a basin of warm water to wash away the trail dust and lending her a clean shirtwaist when Amelia's own was found to be torn at the shoulder. Now surrounded by the Miltons and 3 ranch hands who took their meals at the main house, Amelia picked at the generous plate of beef stew and biscuits before her. Gabriel Rafferty was notably absent, having opted to eat in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Amelia wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed by his absence. The taciturn cowboy made her nervous with his searching blue eyes that seemed to cut through her carefully constructed story, but she also felt oddly safe in his presence. "So you've come all the way from Boston to be our new schoolteacher," Henry Milton was saying, his weathered face creased in a friendly smile beneath his silver-streaked beard. "That's quite a journey for a young lady." Amelia nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, I was fortunate to secure the position through correspondence. I've always been drawn to the idea of helping shape young minds in places where education is most needed. Well, we're mighty glad to have you, Martha said warmly. The children have been without proper schooling since Miss Wilson married and moved to Denver last spring. The conversation continued pleasantly, with the Miltons and their foreman discussing the town of Silverdale, its inhabitants, and the challenges of the coming school year. Amelia responded appropriately, asking the right questions and expressing appropriate enthusiasm, all while her mind raced with anxiety. Every query about her background required another careful lie, another fabrication to maintain the identity she'd created. The truth was, Amelia Evans had never taught a day in her life. She had been educated at a fine ladies' seminary in Boston, true enough, but her knowledge of pedagogy was limited to her own experiences as a student. The teaching position had been her salvation, an advertisement in a Boston newspaper that had appeared at precisely the moment she needed to disappear. After dinner, Martha showed Amelia to a small but comfortable bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. You rest now, dear, you've had quite an ordeal. Henry will drive you into town tomorrow after breakfast. You're very kind, Mrs. Milton. I can't thank you enough. Once alone, Amelia sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing her carefully maintained composure to crumble. She pressed her hands against her mouth to stifle a sob. How had it come to this? 3 weeks ago, she had been safely ensconced in her father's Boston townhouse, her future seemingly secure. Now she was thousands of miles from everything familiar, hiding behind a false identity, with less than $20 to her name. She moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch yard bathed in moonlight. A solitary figure caught her attention, Gabriel Rafferty, leaning against the corral fence, smoking a cigarette. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the alertness in his posture. He was a man who never fully relaxed, who always seemed to be watching, waiting. What demons drove him to such vigilance? As if sensing her gaze, Gabe suddenly looked up toward her window. Amelia stepped back quickly, her heart racing. The last thing she needed was to draw more of his attention. Gabriel Rafferty was too perceptive by half, and she couldn't afford to have anyone questioning her story too closely, not when discovery could mean her ruin or worse. Turning from the window, Amelia unpinned her hair and began brushing it with methodical strokes, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Tomorrow she would reach Silverdale, begin her new life as a schoolteacher, and put as much distance as possible between herself and both her past in Boston and the unsettlingly observant cowboy who had rescued her. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the strange frontier sounds of coyotes and creaking timber, Amelia couldn't banish the memory of those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. The following morning, Gabe was cinching his saddle on Scout when Henry Milton approached, hat in hand. Morning, Gabe got a favor to ask. Gabe straightened, instantly wary. Favors usually meant complications, sir. I need you to escort Miss Evans into Silverdale today. Martha's taken ill with one of her headaches, and I can't leave her. The new schoolmarm needs to get settled before school starts next week. Gabe stifled a groan. The last thing he wanted was to spend more time with the mysterious Amelia Evans. Surely one of the other hands. I'd trust you more with a young lady's safety, Milton interrupted. Besides, you're the one who found her. Seems fitting you should see her safely to her destination. There was no graceful way to refuse, so Gabe merely nodded. Yes, sir, I'll hitch up the buckboard. An hour later, Gabe sat beside Amelia on the wagon seat, maintaining a proper distance as they rolled towards Silverdale. She wore the same blue traveling dress, now brushed clean of dust, with a matching bonnet shading her face from the summer sun. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until Gabe felt compelled to break it. Mrs. Milton packed a lunch, he said, nodding toward the basket at their feet. We'll reach town by early afternoon. Thank you. Amelia's hands were tightly clasped in her lap. Mr. Rafferty, I want to apologize if I seemed ungrateful yesterday. The accident was quite frightening. Gabe glanced at her, noting the tension in her posture. No need to apologize. The frontier can be jarring for those not accustomed to it. She smiled faintly. Is it that obvious I don't belong here? Most folks who belong were either born to it or driven to it by necessity, he said, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. And which are you, Mr. Rafferty? The question caught him off guard. Few people asked him personal questions and fewer still received answers. Yet something in her tone, genuinely curious rather than merely polite, made him respond. A bit of both, I suppose. Born in Missouri, came west with my parents when I was 12. They thought to make a better life. His jaw tightened. It killed them instead. Amelia's green eyes widened. I'm so sorry, that was thoughtless of me to ask. Gabe shrugged, already regretting his candor. It was a long time ago. They lapsed into silence again, but it felt different now, less strained, more contemplative. As they crossed a shallow stream, the wagon wheels splashing through the clear water, a family of deer bounded away through the trees. Oh, Amelia exclaimed, her face lighting up at the sight. How beautiful. Gabe watched her rather than the deer, struck by the transformation. For a moment, the guarded young woman was replaced by someone filled with genuine wonder. It made her seem younger, more vulnerable, and far more dangerous to his peace of mind. You'll see plenty of wildlife around these parts, he said gruffly, turning his attention back to the trail. Deer, elk, bear if you're unlucky. Bear, the apprehension in her voice was almost comical. They usually keep their distance from settlements. It's people you need to watch out for more than animals. Her expression sobered immediately. Yes, I suppose that's true everywhere. There was a weight to her words that piqued Gabe's curiosity, but he resisted the urge to press her. Instead, he pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the natural features of the territory and the brief history of Silverdale, which had grown from a mining camp to a small but respectable town in less than a decade. As they approached the outskirts of town, Amelia grew noticeably tenser. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the wagon seat. Are you feeling unwell, Miss Evans? Gabe asked, concerned despite himself. She shook her head quickly. Just nervous about making a good impression. First impressions are so important, don't you think? Never gave it much thought, he replied honestly. Most folks out here judge you by your actions, not your words or appearance. I hope you're right, she straightened her bonnet. Could you tell me again where the schoolhouse is located? End of Main Street, just past the church. The teachers' quarters are attached to the back, small but decent, from what I've heard. The town council had it built 3 years ago, when they decided Silverdale had enough children to warrant a proper school. Silverdale came fully into view as they crested a low hill, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a wide dirt road, with scattered houses and small farms spreading outward from the town center. It wasn't much compared to eastern cities, but it represented civilization in this remote territory. As they drove down Main Street, Gabe was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Silverdale wasn't large enough for strangers to pass unnoticed, and the arrival of the new schoolteacher had been anticipated for weeks. Several people called out greetings, which Gabe acknowledged with nods while Amelia smiled nervously. They pulled up in front of a modest building with large windows and a small bell tower. Next to it stood the white-painted church, its steeple the tallest structure in town. A man in a black suit emerged from the school building as they halted the wagon, Reverend Thomas Parker, who served as both minister and head of the school board. You must be Miss Evans, he called out, approaching with a broad smile beneath his neatly trimmed beard. We'd begun to worry when you didn't arrive yesterday. Gabe helped Amelia down from the wagon, noting how she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin before turning to greet the Reverend. Reverend Parker, I presume. I apologize for the delay. I had a mishap with my wagon some miles outside of town. Mr. Rafferty was kind enough to rescue me and bring me here. The Reverend's eyebrows rose slightly as he turned to Gabe. Rafferty. From the Circle R. Gabe touched his hat brim. Reverend. Well, we're grateful to you for delivering our new teacher safely. Parker's attention returned to Amelia. Come, Miss Evans, let me show you to your quarters and introduce you to some of the town council members. They're quite eager to meet you. As the Reverend led Amelia toward the schoolhouse, she glanced back at Gabe. Thank you again, Mr. Rafferty, for everything. Gabe merely nodded, already turning to climb back onto the wagon. His task was complete. The mysterious Miss Evans was safely delivered. He should have felt nothing but relief to be rid of her and the strange tension that seemed to vibrate between them. Yet as he guided the wagon back down Main Street, he found himself wondering about the shadows behind her smile and the secrets in her eyes. What was she running from, and why did he care? He gave himself a mental shake. Amelia Evans was Silverdale's concern now, not his. He had a job to return to, horses to break, cattle to tend. She would become just another face in town, someone to nod to politely on his occasional visits for supplies, nothing more. But even as he told himself this, Gabe knew that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The young woman with honey-blonde hair and secrets in her green eyes had somehow slipped past his defenses, awakening questions he'd long ago learned to silence. Amelia stood in the center of her new home, a small room attached to the back of the schoolhouse, furnished simply with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a writing desk, and a rocking chair. A tiny kitchen area occupied one corner, with a cast-iron stove, a dry sink, and a few shelves for provisions. It was humble but clean, and most importantly, it was hers alone. After Reverend Parker had shown her the schoolhouse and introduced her to several prominent citizens, including the mayor and the town doctor, she had been left to settle in. The Reverend's wife had thoughtfully stocked the small pantry with basic provisions, and someone had left a bouquet of wildflowers on the desk. Amelia sank onto the bed, suddenly overcome by the reality of her situation. She was here, in a remote frontier town, miles from everything familiar, about to assume a role she was wholly unprepared for. What had seemed a desperate but workable plan in Boston now felt like madness. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, clenching her hands into fists. "You have no choice." Rising resolutely, she unpacked her meager belongings. The trunk Gabriel Rafferty had rescued from her broken-down wagon contained her few remaining dresses, undergarments, a small collection of books, and her mother's silver hairbrush, one of the few valuable items she hadn't been forced to sell. Hidden in a false bottom of the trunk was her most precious possession, a miniature portrait of her mother, painted before consumption had claimed her life when Amelia was just 14. Amelia placed the portrait on the small table beside her bed, tracing her finger over the familiar features so like her own. "I wish you were here, Mama," she murmured. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Quickly composing herself, Amelia smoothed her dress and opened the door to find an older woman with iron-gray hair and kind eyes standing on her doorstep, a covered basket in her hands. "Miss Evans, I'm Harriet Cooper, the mercantile owner's wife. I thought you might appreciate a hot supper after your journey." "How very kind, please come in." Amelia stepped aside, grateful for the distraction from her troubling thoughts. "Mrs. Cooper bustled in, setting the basket on the small table. "It's nothing fancy, just some chicken and dumplings, fresh bread and apple pie. My Daniel and I raised 3 boys, so I'm used to cooking for hungry appetites." "It smells wonderful," Amelia said sincerely, her stomach growling at the delicious aroma. "I'm very grateful." The older woman surveyed the small room with a practiced eye. "You're going to need a few more things to be comfortable. A proper washstand, some curtains, perhaps another chair. The town council provides the basics, but they're all men. They don't think about the niceties a lady requires." "I'll manage," Amelia said, not wanting to admit how limited her funds were. Mrs. Cooper studied her shrewdly. Most young women don't come all the way to the Colorado Territory alone unless they're running from something or to something. Which is it for you, Miss Evans? Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. I simply wanted an adventure, and to be useful where teachers are scarce." Mrs. Cooper's expression softened. "No need to look so frightened, dear. Everyone in Silverdale has a past, we don't pry. I just want you to know that if you need a friend, my door is always open." "Thank you," Amelia whispered, fighting back tears at the unexpected kindness. After Mrs. Cooper departed, Amelia ate the delicious meal, thinking about the woman's words. Was her secret so obvious? Would everyone in town be speculating about her past? The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. She spent the evening reviewing the school primers and readers stored in the classroom, trying to prepare herself for the formidable task ahead. The school term would begin in just 5 days, and she would be responsible for educating children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. As night fell, Amelia lit the oil lamp and stood at her window, looking out at the unfamiliar constellation of lights that made up Silverdale. Tomorrow she would explore the town, introduce herself to more residents, and continue her preparations. She would become Miss Evans, the dedicated young schoolteacher from Boston, so thoroughly that no one would suspect she was anything else. But as she readied herself for bed, she couldn't help remembering the intensity of Gabriel Rafferty's blue eyes when he'd looked at her. as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade to the frightened woman beneath. She'd likely see him again during his visits to town, and the thought both unnerved and strangely thrilled her. "Don't be a fool," she told her reflection sternly as she brushed her hair. "The last thing you need is to attract attention, especially from a man who clearly mistrusts strangers." Yet as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, it was the cowboy's face that followed her into her dreams, not handsome in the conventional sense perhaps, but compelling in its quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. 2 weeks passed before Gabe returned to Silverdale. He deliberately stayed away, volunteering for the most distant tasks around the Circle R, riding fence lines and checking cattle in the furthest pastures. But eventually supplies were needed, and Milton sent him to town with a list of items to purchase and mail to collect. It was mid-afternoon when he rode into Silverdale, the late August sun beating down mercilessly. Main Street was quiet, most people seeking shelter from the heat. Gabe tied Scout outside the Mercantile and stepped into the relative cool of the store. Daniel Cooper, the proprietor, greeted him with a nod. "Afternoon, Rafferty." "List from Milton." Gabe handed over the paper. "Need it loaded by tomorrow morning." "No problem," Cooper began assembling the items. "Here you brought our new schoolmarm to town. Quite a lady from what my Harriet says." "The children have taken to her already." Gabe merely grunted, uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. "She's made quite an impression," Cooper continued, oblivious to Gabe's discomfort. "Plays the piano at church, started a lending library in the schoolhouse, even got old man Jenkins to donate lumber for new desks." Despite himself, Gabe was impressed. It seemed Amelia Evans was settling in well. He wasn't sure why the knowledge relieved him. "She mentioned you rescued her from quite a predicament," Cooper added, weighing out coffee beans. "Said she might not have survived if you hadn't come along." "She exaggerates," Gabe muttered. Cooper chuckled. "Modest as always, Rafferty. Well, the whole town's grateful. Good teachers are hard to come by out here." After arranging for the supplies to be ready the next morning, Gabe crossed the street to the post office. As he emerged with a small bundle of mail for the ranch, the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day's lessons. Children spilled out onto the schoolyard, their voices carrying on the still air. Against his better judgment, Gabe found himself walking toward the school. He told himself he was simply curious to see how the Eastern woman was adapting to frontier life. It had nothing to do with the memory of green eyes that had haunted him these past weeks. He stopped at the edge of the schoolyard, watching as Amelia stood in the doorway, bidding farewell to her students. She looked different, more confident, more at ease. Her honey-blonde hair was neatly pinned, and she wore a simple brown dress with a white collar. As the last child departed, she glanced up and saw him. For a moment she froze, surprise evident in her expression. Then, composing herself, she walked across the yard toward him. "Mr. Rafferty, what a pleasant surprise." Gabe touched his hat brim. "Miss Evans. Seems you've settled in." "Yes, everyone has been very welcoming." She hesitated, then smiled. "Would you like to see the schoolhouse? I've made some improvements since my arrival." Before he could formulate a reason to decline, Gabe found himself nodding. Amelia led him into the one-room schoolhouse, where rows of desks faced a larger desk and blackboard. The space was orderly but warmly decorated with pressed wildflowers, student drawings, and maps. "It's not much compared to Eastern schools," she said, a touch defensively. "But we make do." "Looks fine to me," Gabe replied, genuinely impressed by the cheerful, organized space. He noticed a bookshelf along one wall, stocked with more volumes than he would have expected. "Quite a collection." "My little lending library," she said, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. Several families donated books, and Reverend Parker contributed from his personal library. "I believe reading is the foundation of all learning." As she showed him around, pointing out students' work and explaining her teaching methods, Gabe was struck by the transformation. The nervous, guarded woman he'd rescued seemed to have blossomed into a confident, passionate teacher. Yet occasionally, when she thought he wasn't looking, a shadow crossed her face, a momentary return of that hunted expression he'd first noticed. "You've done well here," he said finally. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added softly, "I never properly thanked you for saving me that day. I was not myself." "No thanks necessary." "Nevertheless, I am grateful." She met his eyes directly. "Not just for the rescue, but for your discretion. some men might have asked more questions. The statement hung between them, an acknowledgement of the secrets she kept and his decision not to pry. Gabe found himself wanting to reassure her, though he couldn't say why. Your past is your business, Miss Evans. Out here, most folks are too concerned with surviving to worry about where their neighbors came from. Relief flickered across her features. That's rather liberating to hear. An awkward silence fell. Gabe knew he should take his leave, yet he lingered, reluctant to end their conversation. I should let you get back to your work. Of course, she walked him to the door. Are you staying in town overnight? No, heading back to the ranch tomorrow after I collect supplies. I see. Was that disappointment in her voice, or was he imagining it? Well, please give my regards to the Miltons, Mrs. Milton was very kind to me. At the schoolhouse door, Gabe paused. Miss Evans, if you need anything, he stopped, unsure how to phrase the offer without overstepping. She saved him by smiling. I know where to find you, Mr. Rafferty. Thank you. As Gabe walked back toward the mercantile, he was troubled by his own behavior. Why had he sought her out? Why did he care whether she was adjusting well? Amelia Evans represented everything he avoided: complications, connections, the potential for attachment. Yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, the curiosity about her secrets, the admiration for how she'd carved out a place for herself in this rough frontier town. It was dangerous, this interest. It violated every rule he'd established for his survival. As he mounted Scout and rode toward the boarding house where he'd spend the night, Gabe resolved to put the schoolteacher from his mind. She had her life, he had his, and their paths had crossed only by chance. There was no reason for them to intersect again. But as he passed the schoolhouse one last time and saw lamplight still glowing in the window, Gabe knew his resolution was already crumbling. September brought cooler temperatures and increasing anxiety for Amelia. She had settled into a routine in Silverdale, growing more comfortable with her teaching duties and gradually making friends among the townspeople. Mrs. Cooper had become a particular ally, inviting Amelia for Sunday dinners and offering practical advice on frontier living. But beneath her growing confidence lay constant fear. Each time the stagecoach arrived, Amelia found herself scanning the disembarking passengers, half expecting to see a familiar and dreaded face. Every letter that came for her, mostly school business from the Territorial Education Board, made her heart race until she confirmed it wasn't written in that distinctive, controlling hand she knew so well. On a crisp Saturday morning, Amelia was selecting fabric at the mercantile when the door opened, admitting Gabriel Rafferty. She hadn't seen him since his visit to the schoolhouse 3 weeks earlier, though she'd thought of him often, wondering at her own fascination with the taciturn cowboy. He nodded briefly in her direction before approaching the counter, where Daniel Cooper was already pulling down items from a list. Amelia pretended to be absorbed in choosing between calico prints while acutely aware of his presence. Miss Evans has been teaching my Sarah to play the piano after school, Mrs. Cooper was telling Gabe as she wrapped Amelia's previous purchases. The girl's got a decent ear, according to our schoolmarm. Is that so? Gabe's deep voice carried across the store. We're fortunate to have someone with Miss Evans's refinement in Silverdale, Mrs. Cooper continued, though I do wonder what brings such a well-bred young lady to our little town. Amelia tensed, her fingers tightening on the bolt of fabric. Folks come west for all sorts of reasons, Gabe replied, his tone neutral but somehow pointed. Best not to pry. Mrs. Cooper laughed good-naturedly. You're right, of course, I'm just a nosy old woman. Will you be attending the harvest dance next weekend, Mr. Rafferty? The whole town turns out for it. Hadn't planned on it, Gabe said, just as Amelia finally approached the counter with her selection. Good morning, Mr. Rafferty, she said, striving for a casual tone. How are things at the Circle R? Well enough, his blue eyes assessed her briefly. You look settled in. I am, thank you, she turned to Mrs. Cooper. I'll take 3 yards of this blue calico, please. Making a new dress for the dance, Miss Evans, Mrs. Cooper asked with a knowing smile. Every unmarried man in the county will be there. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's for curtains, actually. My quarters get the morning sun rather directly. After completing her purchase, Amelia nodded politely to both Gabe and the Coopers before exiting the store. She was halfway down the boardwalk when footsteps sounded behind her. Miss Evans. She turned to find Gabe following her, his expression unreadable. Yes, Mr. Rafferty. I'm heading back to the ranch. Thought you might have a message for the Miltons. It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. Amelia studied him for a moment, noting the tension in his jaw, the careful distance he maintained. Please tell them I'm well and grateful for their kindness, she said finally. Mrs. Milton mentioned visiting town soon. I'd be pleased to see her. Gabe nodded, seemingly on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he merely touched his hat brim and turned to leave. Mr. Rafferty, Amelia called impulsively. When he looked back, she continued, you should reconsider the harvest dance. It's important to be part of a community, don't you think? A muscle worked in his jaw, never seen much value in it. Perhaps because you've never truly tried, she suggested gently. Their eyes held for a long moment before he gave a noncommittal shrug. Good day, Miss Evans. As she watched him walk away, Amelia wondered at her own boldness. Why should she care whether Gabriel Rafferty attended a town dance? Why did his solitary existence trouble her so? Perhaps because she recognized in him the same deliberate isolation she had practiced in her previous life, the careful maintenance of emotional distance as a form of self-protection. Shaking off these thoughts, Amelia continued toward the schoolhouse. She had lesson plans to prepare and curtains to sew. She couldn't afford to be distracted by a man who clearly preferred to keep the world at arm's length, especially when her own secrets made close relationships dangerous. Yet that evening, as she stitched the blue calico by lamplight, Amelia found herself imagining a different scenario than her original plan, not curtains, but a dress for the harvest dance. And unbidden came the image of Gabriel Rafferty watching her from across a crowded room, those intense blue eyes seeing more than she wanted to reveal, yet somehow offering acceptance rather than judgment. Foolish girl, she murmured to herself, pricking her finger in her distraction. You didn't come here to find romance, you came to disappear. But as the days passed and the harvest dance approached, Amelia couldn't quite banish the persistent hope that a certain cowboy might appear after all. The harvest dance was held in the newly constructed barn at the Peterson farm just outside of Silverdale. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the hay-strewn floor where couples twirled to the lively music of fiddles and a wheezy accordion. Long tables laden with food lined one wall, while a cider barrel occupied a corner, surrounded by thirsty dancers. Amelia stood near the entrance, greeting her students and their parents. She had ultimately decided to make a new dress from the blue calico, and Mrs. Cooper had helped her style her hair in a becoming arrangement of loose curls. She felt both excited and apprehensive, her first social gathering in Silverdale, and her first real opportunity to feel part of the community. As the evening progressed, Amelia danced with several partners, the young blacksmith's apprentice, Dr. Williams, even Reverend Parker. She laughed at jokes, shared refreshments with the other unmarried women, and generally enjoyed herself more than she had anticipated. Yet her eyes kept drifting to the barn entrance. He probably won't come, Mrs. Cooper said softly, appearing at her side during a break between dances. Rafferty keeps to himself. Amelia blushed, embarrassed at being so transparent. I was just watching for latecomers. Several of my students haven't arrived yet. Mrs. Cooper's knowing smile indicated she wasn't fooled. He's a good man, but damaged somehow. Lost his parents young, from what I've heard. Keeps his distance from everyone. Some people find safety in solitude, Amelia murmured, and some use it as a prison, the older woman replied. Ah, here comes my Daniel to claim his dance. Don't wait too long for what might not arrive, dear. As Mrs. Cooper was whisked away by her husband, Amelia decided to step outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in Boston. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and moved away from the noise of the barn, seeking a moment of quiet. A movement in the shadows near the corral caught her attention. A tall figure leaned against the fence, the ember of a cigarette glowing briefly as he took a drag. Even in the darkness, she recognized the broad shoulders and characteristic stance. Mr. Rafferty, she called softly, approaching him. I didn't know you were here. Gabe straightened, quickly dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his boot. Miss Evans just arrived. But you've been standing out here rather than joining the dance. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see his face in the moonlight. He'd shaved, she noticed, and wore a clean shirt under his best vest. You made the effort to come, yet you're hiding in the shadows. Not much for crowds, he said, his voice gruff. Or dancing. Yet here you are, she tilted her head, studying him. Why? Gabe looked away, seemingly fascinated by the distant mountains. Been thinking about what you said. About community. Amelia felt a surge of pleasure at his admission. I'm glad it can be. Healing to belong somewhere. That what you're looking for, Miss Evans, healing. The question was too perceptive, striking too close to truths she couldn't share. Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite her shawl. I think everyone who comes to the frontier is looking for something, she said carefully. A fresh start, perhaps. Or an escape, Gabe suggested, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. For a moment, Amelia couldn't breathe. He knew not the specifics, perhaps, but he understood that she was running from something. The realization terrified and relieved her simultaneously. Sometimes, she whispered, those are the same thing. The admission hung between them, neither quite willing to break the fragile moment of understanding. From the barn came the sound of the fiddles striking up a waltz, the melody drifting through the night air. Would you care to dance, Miss Evans? Gabe asked suddenly, his voice rougher than usual. Out here, I mean. Away from the crowd. The unexpected offer touched her deeply. He was meeting her halfway, coming to the dance but staying within his comfort zone, offering connection while maintaining the distance he needed. I would like that very much, Mr. Rafferty. He stepped forward awkwardly, clearly unaccustomed to such situations. Amelia moved to meet him, placing one hand on his shoulder while he cautiously took her other hand in his. His free hand settled lightly at her waist, barely touching her. They began to move to the distant music, their steps hesitant at first, then finding a rhythm. Gabe was surprisingly graceful for a man who claimed not to dance, and Amelia found herself relaxing into his lead. Where did you learn to waltz, Mr. Rafferty? She asked, looking up at him. A faint smile touched his lips. My mother taught me, said every gentleman should know how. She was right, Amelia returned his smile. Though I imagine you've had few opportunities to practice out here. First time in years, he admitted, probably stepping all over your feet. Not at all, you dance very well. They circled slowly in the moonlight, the space between them gradually diminishing as they grew more comfortable. Amelia was acutely conscious of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him, the surprising gentleness with which he held her. As the music reached its conclusion, they slowed to a stop but didn't immediately separate. For a breathless moment, Amelia thought he might kiss her. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips, and she felt herself leaning slightly toward him. Then a burst of laughter from nearby dancers who had spilled out of the overcrowded barn broke the spell. Gabe stepped back, releasing her, and the cool night air rushed in where his warmth had been. Thank you for the dance, Miss Evans, he said formally, though his voice had a husky quality that hadn't been there before. Amelia, she said impulsively. Please call me Amelia when we're not in public. He looked startled, then pleased. Gabe, he offered in return. Most folks call me Gabe. Thank you for the dance, Gabe, she said softly. And for coming tonight. He nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. They stood awkwardly for a moment before Amelia gestured toward the barn. I should return. People will wonder where I've gone. Of course, Gabe hesitated, then added, I'll be in town again next Saturday. Perhaps I could call on you, properly, I mean. The formal request, so unexpected from the solitary cowboy, made Amelia's heart race. It was dangerous, this growing connection between them. Her past loomed like a shadow, threatening any chance at happiness, yet she couldn't bring herself to refuse. I would like that, she said finally, around 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, he confirmed, a rare smile transforming his features. As Amelia returned to the bright, noisy barn, her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Joy at this new, tentative connection warred with fear of its potential consequences. Gabriel Rafferty was becoming important to her, too important for a woman with secrets as devastating as hers. For the first time since arriving in Silverdale, Amelia truly regretted the lies she'd told. How could she build anything real with a man like Gabe when her entire existence here was founded on deception? Yet as she rejoined the festivities, occasionally catching glimpses of Gabe as he circulated awkwardly at the edges of the gathering, Amelia couldn't suppress the hope that had taken root in her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, her past wouldn't follow her after all. Perhaps here, with this man who seemed to understand the need for new beginnings, she might finally find peace. It was a dangerous hope, but for tonight, under the harvest moon, she allowed herself to believe it could be possible. The following Saturday dawned clear and mild, a perfect late September day. Gabe rode into Silverdale earlier than necessary, his stomach knotted with an unfamiliar anxiety. He'd spent the week alternately anticipating and dreading his promised call on Amelia, half convinced he should make an excuse and avoid the whole situation. What did he know about calling on a lady? What could a rough cowboy like him possibly offer a refined, educated woman like Amelia Evans? And more importantly, why was he even considering such complications in his carefully ordered life? Yet here he was, dressed in his cleanest clothes, his hair still damp from washing, a small package tucked into his saddlebag. Gabe tied Scout outside the mercantile and steeled himself to enter. Mrs. Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly at his appearance. "My, don't you look nice today, Mr. Rafferty." Gabe cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Need some coffee and tobacco, ma'am, and," he hesitated. "Do you have any of those peppermint sticks?" Her expression softened into understanding. "We certainly do." They happen to be Miss Evans's favorite. She buys one every Friday afternoon. Of course, Mrs. Cooper would immediately divine his intentions. Gabe felt heat rise to his face as the woman selected a paper-wrapped peppermint stick and added it to his purchases. "She likes wildflowers too," Mrs. Cooper added casually, "especially those purple ones that grow near the creek." Gabe merely nodded, paid for his items, and escaped the knowing smile of the shopkeeper. He considered following her hint about the wildflowers, but decided it would be too obvious after their conversation. Instead, he led Scout toward the small church, where he knew Reverend Parker would be preparing his Sunday sermon. The minister seemed surprised but pleased by Gabe's request to use the church piano briefly. "Of course, my boy. Miss Evans usually practices here on Saturday mornings, but she finished early today. Said she had preparations to make at home." Gabe sat at the piano, staring at the keys for a long moment before placing his fingers where his mother had taught him so many years ago. The first notes were hesitant, rusty from disuse, but gradually his hands remembered. The simple melody of "Beautiful Dreamer" filled the small church, not perfectly played, but recognizable and heartfelt. When he finished, Gabe noticed Reverend Parker watching from the doorway, an expression of gentle approval on his face. "That was lovely, Mr. Rafferty. I didn't know you played." "I don't really. My mother taught me that one song." Gabe stood, uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you for letting me use the piano." "Any time, my boy, any time." At precisely 2 o'clock, Gabe found himself standing outside Amelia's small quarters attached to the schoolhouse, the peppermint stick in one hand and a small, cloth-wrapped package in the other. He took a deep breath and knocked. Amelia opened the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. She wore a simple but pretty green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her honey-blonde hair was arranged in a becoming style, with soft curls framing her face. "Gabe," she said, a genuine smile lighting her features. "Please come in." Her quarters were small but comfortable, decorated with the blue calico curtains she'd made and brightened by carefully arranged wildflowers. Books were stacked everywhere, on the small desk, beside the rocking chair, even on the tiny table where 2 place settings waited. "I thought we might have tea," she said, gesturing toward the stove where a kettle was beginning to steam, "unless you prefer coffee." "Tea is fine," Gabe said, suddenly tongue-tied. He thrust the peppermint stick toward her. "This is for you." Her delighted smile eased some of his nervousness. "How did you know I love these?" "Lucky guess," he said, not wanting to admit Mrs. Cooper's involvement. "And what's this?" she asked, noticing the package in his other hand. Gabe hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "It's nothing much, just something I thought you might like." She accepted the small bundle and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a small, hand-carved wooden box with a delicate pattern of leaves etched into the lid. Her fingers traced the design wonderingly. "Did you make this?" He nodded, relieved by her apparent appreciation. "Used to carve a lot as a boy, still do sometimes on long winter evenings." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you, Gabe." "Thought you might use it for hairpins or such," he said, watching as she opened the lid to reveal the velvet-lined interior. "It's perfect." She placed it carefully on her desk, then turned to prepare the tea. As they settled with their cups, the initial awkwardness gradually faded. Amelia asked about his work at the Circle R, and Gabe found himself describing the ranch operations in more detail than he'd intended, even sharing stories about some of the more difficult horses he'd trained. "You have a gift with animals," Amelia observed. "Mrs. Milton mentioned how you gentled that wild mare everyone else had given up on." "Animals are straightforward," Gabe said, surprised by her interest. "They don't hide their feelings or intentions, makes them easier to understand than people." "Is that why you prefer their company?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Gabe considered the question, found himself answering more honestly than he'd intended. "After my parents died, I learned it's safer not to get attached. Animals don't make you care and then leave you." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. It was too personal, too revealing. But Amelia didn't seem put off by his candor. "I understand that feeling," she said quietly. "Loss makes us afraid to risk our hearts again." There was such genuine empathy in her voice that Gabe found himself asking, "Who did you lose?" "My mother when I was 14. And my father," she hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. "My father is still living, but we're estranged." It wasn't the whole truth. Gabe could sense the careful editing, but he appreciated her willingness to share even that much. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "As am I for your losses," she replied. Then, with a visible effort to lighten the mood, she asked, "Did you really play the piano at the church today?" "Reverend Parker mentioned it when I saw him this morning." Gabe groaned, embarrassed, was hoping he wouldn't say anything. "I'm not much of a musician." "He said it was beautiful," Amelia said, her eyes soft. "Would you play for me sometime?" "Only know the one song," he admitted, "and not well at that." "Still, I'd love to hear it." She hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I could teach you another, if you'd like." The offer touched him deeply. No one had shown interest in his minimal musical abilities since his mother died. "I'd like that." Their conversation continued, ranging from books they'd read to childhood memories to their differing experiences of frontier life. As the afternoon light began to fade, Gabe realized with surprise that he'd talked more in these few hours than he typically did in a month. Something about Amelia made it easy to lower his guard, to share thoughts he usually kept to himself. When it was finally time to leave, they stood awkwardly at her door, neither quite willing to end the afternoon. "Thank you for coming," Amelia said, her eyes meeting his briefly before dropping to study the floor. "I enjoyed our conversation very much." "As did I," Gabe hesitated, then added, "I'll be in town again next Saturday. Perhaps we could." He trailed off, uncertain how to phrase the invitation. "I'd like that," she said, saving him from his fumbling. "Perhaps a walk by the creek if the weather is fine." "I'd like that too." Impulsively, Gabe reached for her hand, raising it briefly to his lips in a gesture he'd seen but never performed. "Good day, Amelia." Her cheeks flushed prettily. "Good day, Gabe." As he rode back to the Circle R, Gabe found himself whistling, something he couldn't remember doing in years. The afternoon had awakened feelings he'd long suppressed. Hope, connection, the tentative beginnings of trust. Dangerous feelings, perhaps, for a man who'd survived by emotional isolation. Yet for the first time in memory, Gabe found himself looking forward rather than back, anticipating possibilities rather than guarding against them. The rational part of him recognized that Amelia Evans remained a mystery in many ways. Her careful avoidance of certain topics, the shadows that sometimes crossed her face, the sense that she was holding back significant parts of herself, all suggested complications he'd normally avoid at all costs. But as Scout carried him homeward under the darkening sky, Gabe admitted to himself that Amelia's mysteries no longer seemed threatening. Instead, they were simply another facet of a woman he was coming to admire deeply, and perhaps, if he dared to acknowledge it, to care for in ways he'd never expected. October brought vibrant autumn colors and increasingly frequent visits between Gabe and Amelia. Their Saturday meetings became a fixture, walks along the creek when weather permitted, quiet conversations in her quarters when it didn't. Amelia kept her promise to teach him another piano piece, a simple rendition of Greensleeves that he practiced awkwardly but determinedly. For Amelia, these afternoons were both joy and torment. Joy in the growing closeness with a man whose quiet strength and unexpected gentleness touched her deeply, torment in the knowledge that their relationship was built partly on lies. With each passing week, the burden of her deception grew heavier. On a crisp Saturday in late October, they walked together along the creek, the trees ablaze with red and gold. Amelia had grown comfortable enough with Gabe to take his arm as they navigated the uneven path, though even that innocent contact sent her pulse racing. "Winter will be here soon," Gabe observed, helping her over a fallen log. "First snow usually comes by early November." "I've been warned the winters are harsh here," Amelia said. "Nothing like Boston, where the harbor moderates the temperature." "The school has a good stove, and your quarters are well insulated," Gabe assured her. "But you'll need more firewood than you've laid in. I'll bring some next week." His matter-of-fact care for her welfare warmed Amelia more than any fire could. "Thank you. I'm still adjusting to managing these practical matters myself." They reached a small clearing where the creek widened, forming a peaceful pool. It had become their favorite spot, with a fallen tree providing a natural bench overlooking the water. As they settled side by side, Amelia gathered her courage to broach a subject that had been troubling her. "Gabe," she began hesitantly, "may I ask you something rather personal?" He turned to look at her, his expression open. "Of course. After your parents died, how did you manage?" "Not practically, but," she struggled to find the right words, "how did you find the strength to continue?" Gabe was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the flowing water. "Didn't have much choice at first," he finally said. "Was just trying to survive day to day. Later, I guess I kept going because giving up would have dishonored their memory." "But you isolated yourself," Amelia pressed gently. "You built walls. Seemed safer that way." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Why do you ask?" Amelia twisted her hands in her lap, searching for a way to express her fears without revealing too much. "I've built walls too," she admitted. "Different circumstances, but the same instinct to protect myself through distance." "From what?" Gabe asked quietly. "From pain, from betrayal." She took a deep breath. "From the consequences of truths I'm not ready to face." It was the closest she'd come to acknowledging her deception, and she watched anxiously for his reaction. Would he press for details she couldn't provide? Instead, Gabe simply reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "We've all got things we're not ready to share, Amelia. Doesn't make you unworthy of happiness." The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to her eyes. "Even if those things might hurt people I care about, people like you." His grip tightened slightly on her hand. "Are you planning to hurt me?" "Never intentionally," she whispered. "Then we'll face whatever comes when it comes." He turned to look directly at her, his blue eyes serious. "I've spent too many years letting fear of loss keep me from living. Meeting you, it's made me question that choice." The vulnerability in his admission touched Amelia deeply. This man who guarded himself so carefully from the world was offering her a precious gift, his trust, his willingness to risk pain for the chance at something meaningful between them. And in that moment, looking into his eyes, Amelia made a decision. If when her past caught up with her, she would tell Gabe the whole truth, he deserved nothing less. But for now, she would embrace this unexpected happiness, this chance to be the person she'd always wanted to be rather than the person circumstances had forced her to become. "Meeting you has changed me too," she said softly. "For the better, I think." Gabe's response wasn't in words. Instead, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Amelia's heart soared at the tender contact, and she responded with a matching gentleness, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. The kiss was brief but profound, a promise exchanged without words. When they drew apart, Gabe's expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just occurred. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, a rare smile softening his features. "I've wanted you to," Amelia confessed, her cheeks warm despite the cool October air. They sat together by the creek until the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. As shadows lengthened, Gabe walked Amelia back to the schoolhouse, their hands entwined, their conversation comfortable yet charged with new awareness. At her door, he kissed her once more, a slightly longer, more confident caress that left Amelia breathless. "Until next Saturday," he said, his voice husky. "I'll count the days," she replied, meaning it with all her heart. As she watched him walk away, leading Scout toward the livery stable where he would spend the night, Amelia felt both elation and fear. Something precious was growing between them, something she had never expected to find in this remote frontier town. Yet the shadow of her past stretched long behind her, threatening to eclipse this newfound happiness. For the first time since fleeing Boston, Amelia allowed herself to contemplate telling the complete truth, not just to Gabe, but perhaps to the town council as well. Would they understand? Would they allow her to remain as their teacher if they knew she wasn't who she claimed to be? The risks were enormous. Exposure could mean disgrace, dismissal, even legal consequences. Yet the alternative, continuing to build a relationship with Gabe on a foundation of lies, seemed increasingly impossible to bear. As she prepared for bed that night, Amelia made a plan. She would write to her former headmistress in Boston, a woman she trusted implicitly, asking for legitimate teaching references. She would prepare the truth carefully, finding the right moment to reveal it to Gabe. And she would pray that when that moment came, the man who had begun to claim her heart would find it in himself to forgive her deception. It was a fragile hope, but for the first time in months, Amelia allowed herself to believe that perhaps her future could hold more than secrecy and fear. Perhaps it could hold love as well. November arrived with the first snowfall, transforming Silverdale into a winter wonderland of white-capped buildings and frost-edged windows. Gabe had made good on his promise to supply Amelia with firewood, spending an entire Saturday chopping and stacking enough logs to last her through the coldest months. The physical labor had given him time to think about the rapidly evolving relationship between them. Each meeting deepened his feelings for the schoolteacher. Her intelligence, her kindness toward her students, her determination to build a meaningful life in this rough frontier town, all combined to create a powerful attraction that went far beyond her physical beauty. For the first time since his parents' deaths, Gabe found himself thinking about a shared future rather than a solitary one, yet something held him back from fully committing to these new feelings. Despite their growing closeness, Gabe sensed Amelia was still keeping significant parts of herself hidden. The shadow that occasionally crossed her face when certain topics arose, her careful avoidance of details about her life before Silverdale, the nightmares she'd obliquely referenced but refused to explain, all suggested secrets she wasn't yet ready to share. On a bitterly cold morning in mid-November, Gabe rode into Silverdale earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Amelia with an invitation to lunch at the small cafe that had recently opened on Main Street. As he passed the post office, he noticed a commotion. Several townspeople gathered around the stagecoach that had just arrived, despite the freezing temperature. "Telegram for Miss Evans," the driver was announcing, waving a yellow paper. "Anyone know where I can find her?" Without thinking, Gabe stepped forward. "I can take it to her. She'll be at the schoolhouse." The driver looked him over assessingly, then nodded. "See that she gets it right away." Came marked urgent. Gabe tucked the telegram into his coat pocket and continued toward the school, curiosity warring with his respect for Amelia's privacy. Who would be sending her an urgent telegram? And why did the very existence of such a message fill him with uneasiness? As he approached the schoolhouse, he could hear Amelia's clear voice through the open door, leading her students in a geography lesson about the eastern seaboard. Gabe waited outside, not wanting to interrupt the class. Through the window, he could see her moving among the children, her face animated as she described the harbors of Boston and New York. When the lunch hour finally arrived and the children spilled out into the yard, Gabe entered the schoolhouse. Amelia looked up from her desk, surprise and pleasure lighting her features. "Gabe, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Thought I might take you to lunch at Wade's Cafe," he said, removing his hat. "If you're not otherwise occupied." "I'd love that," she began gathering her shawl, then noticed his serious expression. "Is something wrong?" Gabe withdrew the telegram from his pocket. "This came for you on the morning stage." Marked urgent. All color drained from Amelia's face as she stared at the yellow paper. Her hand trembled visibly as she reached for it. "Are you all right?" Gabe asked, alarmed by her reaction. "Yes, of course," she said, though her voice was faint. "Just surprised. I rarely receive telegrams." She broke the seal with unsteady fingers and unfolded the message. As she read, her face grew even paler, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Gabe stepped forward, concerned. "Amelia." "It's nothing," she said quickly, crumpling the telegram and shoving it into her desk drawer. "Just some unexpected news from Boston. Nothing important." The obvious lie hung between them. Whatever the telegram contained, it had clearly disturbed her deeply. Gabe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "Amelia," he said carefully, "if you're in some kind of trouble." "I'm not," she interrupted, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Truly, Gabe, it's merely a former acquaintance letting me know they've discovered my whereabouts. Nothing to concern yourself with." But everything about her demeanor, the trembling hands, the ashen face, the fear lurking behind her smile, contradicted her reassurances. "Whoever this acquaintance is," Gabe said slowly, "they've frightened you. Why?" Amelia turned away, busying herself with straightening items on her desk. "You're imagining things. I was simply startled to receive a telegram. Now, didn't you mention lunch?" "I'm quite famished." Gabe knew he was being deliberately diverted, but he also recognized that pressing further would only cause Amelia to retreat behind higher walls. Whatever secret the telegram contained, she wasn't ready to share it. "Of course," he said, offering his arm, "Wade makes a fine beef stew on Wednesdays." As they walked to the cafe, Gabe noticed how Amelia's eyes darted anxiously around the street, as if expecting to see someone unwelcome. Her hand clutched his arm with unusual tightness, and her conversation was distracted, punctuated by long silences. Over lunch, she made a visible effort to appear normal, asking about affairs at the Circle R and commenting on the approaching Thanksgiving celebrations. But the sparkle was gone from her eyes, replaced by a wariness that reminded Gabe of their first meeting, the frightened young woman beside a broken wagon, hiding something even in her gratitude for rescue. When he walked her back to the schoolhouse for the afternoon session, Gabe paused at the door, reluctant to leave her in this state. "Amelia," he said quietly, "whatever's troubling you, I hope you know you can trust me with it." She met his eyes then, genuine anguish visible in her expression. "There are some burdens we have to bear alone, Gabe, some mistakes that can't be undone, no matter how much we might wish it." "I don't believe that," he said firmly. "Nothing is beyond forgiveness if the heart behind it is true." Tears welled in her eyes. "You may think differently when," she stopped herself abruptly, "I should prepare for my students." "I'll see you Saturday," Gabe said, though it felt more like a question than a statement. "Yes," she replied, but something in her tone lacked conviction. "Saturday." As he rode back to the Circle R that afternoon, Gabe couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The telegram had awakened demons Amelia had been trying to outrun, demons connected to the secrets she'd been keeping since her arrival in Silverdale. For the first time, Gabe confronted the possibility that those secrets might be more significant than he'd imagined. What if she wasn't simply running from an unhappy home or a broken heart? What if her past contained something that could threaten the life she'd built here, and the relationship growing between them? The questions haunted him throughout the long ride, but one thing became increasingly clear. Whatever Amelia was hiding, whatever she feared, Gabe wasn't willing to let it destroy what they'd found together. After years of isolation, he'd finally opened his heart to the possibility of love. He wouldn't surrender that hard-won territory without a fight, not even to the ghosts of Amelia's past. The telegram changed everything. Amelia had read the terse message with mounting horror. "Found you stop arriving SILVRDAL, November 25th stop. Prepare to return to Boston or face, CONSEQUENCES, stop Richard BLACKWLL." Richard had found her. The very thing she'd dreaded for months was now inevitable. In just over a week, her carefully constructed new life would collapse like a house of cards. For the next few days, Amelia went through the motions of her normal routine, teaching her classes with mechanical precision, while her mind raced with increasingly desperate plans. She could run again, perhaps to California or even Oregon, but she had so little money saved, and winter was a dangerous time to travel. Besides, if Richard had found her once, he could certainly find her again. She could stay and face him, try to reason with him, but the memory of his cold rage, his implacable determination, made that option seem hopeless. Richard Blackwell was not a man who could be swayed once his mind was set. The third option, the one she returned to repeatedly despite its risks, was to tell the truth to Gabe, to Reverend Parker, to the town council. To throw herself on the mercy of the community she'd come to love and the man who had begun to heal her wounded heart. But would they understand, or would they turn their backs on her, disgusted by her deception? By Saturday, Amelia was nearly paralyzed with indecision. She'd barely slept, her nights haunted by nightmares of the past and terrifying visions of the future. When Gabe arrived for their usual afternoon together, she greeted him with a forced smile that felt brittle on her face. "I thought we might stay in today," she suggested, gesturing toward the stove where a kettle was already heating. "The wind is quite bitter." Gabe studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. "You look exhausted." "Have you been sleeping?" "Not well," she admitted, turning away to prepare the tea. "Winter nights are difficult sometimes." He didn't press, but she could feel his watchful gaze as they settled with their teacups. The silence between them, usually comfortable, now felt loaded with unspoken questions. "I've been thinking," Gabe said finally, "about Christmas. The Miltons always host a dinner for the hands who don't have family nearby. I wondered if you might consider joining us this year." The simple invitation, with its implication of a shared future extending beyond the immediate crisis, nearly broke Amelia's composure. By Christmas, her life here might be in ruins. She might be back in Boston, trapped once more in the gilded cage she'd fought so desperately to escape. "That's very kind," she managed, her voice unsteady, "but it's difficult to make plans so far ahead." Something shifted in Gabe's expression, a hardening of resolve, perhaps. He set down his cup and leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Amelia, something's wrong. You've been different since that telegram arrived. Whatever it is, whatever you're afraid of, let me help." The genuine concern in his voice crumbled the last of her resistance. Setting down her own cup with trembling hands, Amelia rose and moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered schoolyard while gathering her courage. "The telegram was from a man named Richard Blackwell," she began, her voice barely audible. "He's a banker in Boston, wealthy, influential, respected." She turned to face Gabe, needing to see his reaction. "And until 4 months ago, he was my fiancé." Gabe's expression remained carefully neutral, though she saw his fingers tighten slightly on his cup. "I see." "No, you don't," Amelia said with a bitter laugh. "The engagement wasn't my choice. It was arranged by my father, who owed Blackwell a considerable sum of money. I was the payment, the respectable young wife, who would give Blackwell the social standing he craved." "Your father sold you to settle a debt." Gabe's voice was dangerously quiet. "In essence, yes. When my mother died, he began gambling heavily, drinking more. The family resources dwindled. Blackwell helped him repeatedly, knowing exactly what he was doing, creating a debt too large to repay by any means except my hand in marriage." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, fighting against the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. "I refused at first, but my father made it clear that if I didn't comply, he would be ruined, possibly imprisoned for fraud related to some of his business dealings. I felt I had no choice." "So you agreed to marry this man?" Gabe asked, his expression now clearly troubled. "I did." Amelia drew a shaky breath. The engagement was announced, preparations began for the wedding. "But as the date approached, I discovered things about Richard Blackwell that terrified me. His first wife died under mysterious circumstances. He had a violent temper behind closed doors. The servants feared him." She moved back to her chair but couldn't bring herself to sit, too agitated to remain still. 3 days before the wedding, his housekeeper took a terrible risk. She showed me the bruises on her arms, told me how he had treated his first wife, warned me that once I was legally his, there would be no escape. Gabe rose as well, his body tense. "He abused them." It wasn't a question, but Amelia nodded anyway. "The housekeeper helped me. She gave me what money she could spare and told me about the advertisement for a teaching position in Colorado Territory. I fled that night with only what I could carry, leaving a note for my father explaining why I couldn't go through with the wedding." The relief of finally speaking the truth was enormous, yet Amelia still couldn't meet Gabe's eyes. "I lied to everyone here. I'm not qualified to be a teacher, though I've tried my best to learn quickly. I used my mother's maiden name. I've been hiding for months, terrified of being found." She finally looked up, needing to see his reaction. "And now he's found me. He's arriving on the 25th, just over a week from now. The telegram said I must return to Boston with him or face consequences. I know him well enough to know that's not an idle threat." Gabe was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "Do you have family who might help you, other than your father?" Amelia shook her head. "No one with the influence to stand against Blackwell. He's powerful, Gabe. Connected to the highest circles of Boston society." His power doesn't extend to Silverdale, Gabe said firmly. We have laws here too. He can't force you to go anywhere against your will. You don't understand, Amelia said desperately. He won't need force, he'll expose me as a fraud. I lied about my qualifications, my name, my background. Once the town council knows, they'll dismiss me immediately. I'll have nowhere to go, no means to support myself. You don't know that, Gabe argued. These are good people, if you explain. And what about you? Amelia interrupted, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I've lied to you from the beginning. Everything between us has been built on deception. Gabe crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. Not everything, he said fiercely. Your fear was real. Your courage in building a new life was real. The woman who teaches those children with such dedication, who plays the piano with such feeling, who has somehow managed to break through every wall I've built around my heart, she's real, Amelia. Whatever name she uses. His words unleashed the tears she'd been holding back for days. Amelia sobbed against his chest as he held her, his arms strong and secure around her trembling body. When she finally quieted, he gently tilted her face up to his. We'll face this together, he promised. I won't let him take you back to a life you fled in fear. How, she whispered, clinging to him like a lifeline. How can we possibly fight someone like Richard Blackwell? First we tell the truth, Gabe said firmly, to Reverend Parker, to the town council. Better they hear it from you than from Blackwell. Terror seized Amelia at the thought. They'll hate me, they'll feel betrayed. They might be shocked, Gabe acknowledged. Angry, even, but when they understand why you did it, what you were running from, Amelia, these people know you now. They've seen your character, your heart. That counts for something out here. His confidence gave her a fragile hope, and if they don't understand, if they turn against me. Gabe's eyes were steady, his voice certain. Then we'll find another place. Together. The simple declaration, with its implication of a shared future regardless of what came next, stunned Amelia. Gabe, you can't mean that. Your life is here. At the Circle R, I won't let you sacrifice that for me. Some things are worth sacrificing everything for, he said quietly. I think you might be one of those things, Amelia Evans, or whatever your real name is. Amelia Andrews, she whispered, giving him her true name for the first time. My mother was Catherine Evans before her marriage. Amelia Andrews, he repeated, a small smile touching his lips. It suits you. He kissed her then, a gentle but firm caress that spoke of protection and promise. When they parted, Amelia felt stronger than she had in days, bolstered by his unwavering support. We should speak to Reverend Parker today, Gabe said, and request a town council meeting as soon as possible. The more people who understand the truth before Blackwell arrives, the better. Though fear still churned in her stomach, Amelia nodded. You're right, no more hiding. As they prepared to leave for the Reverend's home, Amelia felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. The coming days would be among the most difficult of her life, with no guarantee of a positive outcome. Yet having finally shared her burden, having found in Gabe a partner willing to stand beside her despite her deception, Amelia felt a cautious hope taking root alongside her fear. Whatever came next, she would face it with the truth, and with the unexpected gift of a man who saw beyond her secrets to the heart she'd tried so hard to protect. Reverend Parker listened to Amelia's confession in grave silence, his weathered face betraying little of his thoughts. When she finished, he remained quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him in the study of his modest home. You've placed me in a difficult position, Miss Andrews, he said finally, using her real name with deliberate emphasis. As head of the school board, I have a responsibility to the children and their parents. I understand, Reverend, Amelia said quietly. I know I've betrayed your trust. Yet, he continued, his tone softening slightly, as a minister, I'm also called to extend grace to those in desperate circumstances, and it seems yours were desperate indeed. Gabe, who had remained standing protectively near Amelia throughout her explanation, spoke up. Reverend, Amelia has proven herself as a teacher these past months. The children are learning, the parents are satisfied. Does it really matter that she came to the position through unusual means? Deception always matters, Mr. Rafferty, Parker replied sternly, but so does redemption. He turned back to Amelia. You've been an asset to this community, Miss Andrews. The children adore you, and your contributions extend beyond the schoolhouse. These facts cannot be dismissed. Hope flickered in Amelia's chest. Then you're not going to dismiss me immediately. Not immediately, no. I believe this is a matter for the full town council to decide. The Reverend rose from behind his desk. I'll call an emergency meeting for Monday evening. You'll need to repeat your story, answer their questions truthfully. And what about Blackwell? Gabe asked. He arrives on the 25th. One challenge at a time, Mr. Rafferty. Parker's expression was grave. First, let's determine whether Miss Andrews has a position here to defend, then we can address the threat this man poses. It wasn't the unqualified support Amelia had secretly hoped for, but it was more than she had feared. As they left the Reverend's home, she felt both drained and strangely lighter, as if the mere act of confessing had removed some of the weight she'd carried for so long. He didn't condemn you outright, Gabe observed as they walked back toward the schoolhouse. That's a positive sign. Perhaps, Amelia agreed cautiously, but the town council may feel differently. Richard is very persuasive, Gabe. He can appear utterly charming when it serves his purpose. Gabe's jaw tightened. I look forward to meeting this charming man. The cold determination in his voice sent a shiver through Amelia. Gabe, promise me you won't do anything rash. Richard is dangerous in ways that aren't immediately obvious. I won't start trouble, Gabe assured her. But I won't stand by and let him threaten you either. That evening, Gabe insisted on staying in town rather than returning to the ranch. He took a room at the boarding house but spent most of the night sitting on Amelia's small porch, rifle across his knees, despite her protests that Blackwell wasn't due for another week. Better safe than sorry, was all he would say, his expression unyielding. Sunday passed in a blur of anxiety for Amelia. News of the emergency town council meeting had spread quickly, though the specific reason remained confidential. Several parents approached her after church, expressing concern that she might be ill or planning to leave. Their genuine distress at the possibility of losing her touched Amelia deeply, making the prospect of Monday's meeting both more hopeful and more terrifying. By Monday evening, it seemed the entire town had gathered outside the council chambers, though only council members and those directly involved were permitted inside. Amelia entered with Gabe at her side, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst from her chest. The 5 council members, Reverend Parker, Mayor Williams, Dr. Peterson, Mr. Cooper from the Mercantile, and Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow who owned the boarding house, sat at a long table facing the room. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright suspicion as Amelia took her place before them. Miss Evans, or rather Miss Andrews, Mayor Williams began, Reverend Parker has informed us that you have a matter of some importance to discuss with this council. Please proceed. Drawing a deep breath, Amelia repeated the story she had shared with Gabe and Reverend Parker, forcing herself to meet the council members' eyes as she admitted to her deception about her identity and qualifications. She explained her desperate circumstances in Boston, the coerced engagement, the discoveries that had prompted her flight, and her genuine efforts to fulfill her teaching duties despite her lack of formal training. When she finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Mr. Cooper spoke. Let me understand this clearly. You deliberately misrepresented yourself to obtain a position for which you were not qualified. You've been teaching our children under false pretenses for nearly 4 months. Yes, sir, Amelia admitted, her voice small but steady. I did. I was desperate, and I'm deeply sorry for the deception. Yet, Mrs. Holloway interjected, by all accounts, the children have flourished under your instruction. My own granddaughter speaks of you with nothing but admiration. The quality of her teaching isn't at issue, Dr. Peterson argued. It's the principle of the thing. How can we trust anything about her if she's built her entire presence here on lies? The debate continued, council members expressing varying degrees of outrage, disappointment, and reluctant understanding. Throughout, Gabe stood silently behind Amelia, his presence a steadying force as her future hung in the balance. Finally, Reverend Parker raised his hand for silence. Miss Andrews, would you be willing to step outside while the council deliberates? Amelia nodded, her legs unsteady as she rose. Gabe followed her into the corridor, where the murmur of townspeople still waiting outside could be heard through the main doors. You did well, he told her quietly. You spoke honestly with dignity. It may not be enough, she whispered, leaning against the wall for support. I saw their faces, Gabe, they feel betrayed. Some of them do, he acknowledged. Others seemed more understanding. Either way, you've done what you can. The truth is out now. They waited in tense silence for what seemed an eternity before the council chamber door opened and Reverend Parker beckoned them back inside. Mayor Williams spoke once they were seated. Miss Andrews, this council has carefully considered your situation. Your deception was serious and cannot be entirely overlooked. Amelia's heart sank, but she forced herself to sit straight, determined to accept their judgment with grace. However, the mayor continued, we must also consider your conduct since arriving in Silverdale. By all accounts, you've been a dedicated teacher, a positive influence on our children, and a contributing member of our community. Mrs. Holloway leaned forward. We've also taken into account the desperate circumstances that led to your actions. None of us can claim to know how we might behave if faced with a forced marriage to a man we feared. Therefore, Reverend Parker said, the council has reached a conditional decision. You may retain your position as teacher under certain stipulations. Amelia gasped, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. Stipulations. First, you must write to the Territorial Education Board, explaining your lack of formal qualifications and requesting their assessment of your abilities. If they deem your teaching inadequate, you must abide by their decision. Second, you must use your legal name from this point forward in all official matters. No more deception, however small. Third, you will be placed on a probationary period of 6 months, after which the council will reassess your position. The conditions were more than fair, more generous than Amelia had dared to hope for. I accept, of course, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for your compassion. Don't thank us yet, Dr. Peterson cautioned. We still have the matter of this Blackwell fellow to address. If he's as influential as you claim, he could cause significant problems for our town. We're aware he's due to arrive on the 25th, Mayor Williams added. What do you propose to do when he comes, Miss Andrews? It was the question Amelia had been dreading. I don't know, she admitted. I won't return to Boston with him, but I fear he won't accept my refusal easily. He has no legal claim on her, Gabe interjected, speaking for the first time during the meeting. She broke no laws in leaving an unwanted engagement. Perhaps not, Reverend Parker agreed, but a man of wealth and influence has many ways to exert pressure. We must be prepared for whatever tactics he might employ. I suggest a united front, Mrs. Holloway said firmly. When this man arrives, he should find not a vulnerable young woman alone, but a community standing with her. The simplicity and power of the suggestion moved Amelia to tears. After everything, her deception, the council's understandable anger, they were offering not just forgiveness but protection. It was more than she could have imagined. The town should be informed, Mayor Williams decided. Not all details, perhaps, but enough that they understand the situation. With your permission, Miss Andrews. Amelia nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As the meeting concluded, each council member approached her personally. Their words varied from cautious encouragement to firm warnings about the importance of honesty going forward, but none expressed the outright rejection she had feared. When they finally emerged from the building, Gabe's hand firmly supporting her elbow, Amelia was astonished to find a crowd still waiting. Reverend Parker stepped forward to address them, explaining in measured terms that Miss Andrews had shared important information about her background, that the council had decided to retain her as teacher under certain conditions, and that a man from her past was expected to arrive soon with potentially troubling intentions. This young woman has become part of our community, the Reverend concluded. The council believes she deserves our support in the difficult days ahead. A murmur ran through the crowd, some voices clearly supportive, others more questioning. Then, to Amelia's surprise, Mrs. Cooper stepped forward from the gathering. I don't know what's happened in that meeting room, she announced in her forthright manner, but I know Miss Evans, or Andrews, or whatever her name is, has been nothing but good for this town since she arrived. My Sarah has learned more in these few months than in the entire year before. If she needs our help, she has mine. Others joined in then, voicing similar sentiments. Not everyone, certainly. Amelia noted several people walking away with disapproving expressions, but enough to make her realize that she had truly found a place for herself in this community, despite the foundation of lies. As the crowd finally dispersed, Gabe led Amelia back toward the schoolhouse. You see, he said softly, I told you these were good people. Better than I deserved, she admitted, still dazed by the evening's outcome. I never expected such kindness. You've earned it through your actions these past months. He stopped at her door, turning to face her in the moonlight, and now we prepare for Blackwell's arrival. We have 6 days to be ready. The reminder of the impending confrontation dimmed Amelia's fragile happiness. He won't give up easily, Gabe. Even with the town's support, Richard is formidable. So are we, Gabe replied, his voice filled with a quiet conviction that somehow, against all reason, made Amelia believe him. As he bid her good night with a gentle kiss, promising to return the next day, Amelia found herself clinging to that conviction. Perhaps, just perhaps, the nightmare that had pursued her for months was approaching its end. With the truth finally spoken and a community willing to stand beside her, Amelia dared to hope that freedom, real freedom, might finally be within her grasp. The stagecoach was due to arrive at noon on November 25th. By 11, a sizable portion of Silverdale's population had gathered on Main Street, creating an atmosphere that was part curiosity, part protective vigilance. Gabe stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, his stance casual but his eyes alert. Mayor Williams and Reverend Parker waited nearby, having decided that official town representatives should be present for the confrontation everyone expected. Amelia waited in the schoolhouse at Gabe's insistence. Let him come to you, Gabe had argued. Let him see you've built a life here with people who care what happens to you. Now, as the distant sound of the approaching stage reached his ears, Gabe felt tension coil through his body. In the days since the council meeting, he had learned more about Richard Blackwell from Amelia's reluctant descriptions. The picture that emerged was of a calculating, controlling man used to getting his way through charm when possible, intimidation when necessary. The stage is early, Reverend Parker observed, checking his pocket watch, just like trouble to arrive ahead of schedule. The conveyance rattled into town in a cloud of dust, 4 horses pulling the vehicle to a stop in front of the small hotel that served as the stage office. As the driver secured the brake, the door opened, and a man stepped out. Gabe's first impression was of immaculate grooming and expensive taste. Richard Blackwell stood perhaps an inch shorter than himself, but carried himself with the confidence of a man used to commanding attention. His dark hair was perfectly trimmed, his suit clearly custom-tailored, his leather boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dust of travel. Handsome in a conventional way, with sharp features and cold gray eyes, he surveyed the gathered crowd with obvious displeasure. Quite the welcome committee, he remarked to no one in particular, his Boston accent pronounced. I wasn't aware my arrival warranted such attention. Mayor Williams stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Blackwell, I presume. I'm Mayor Williams of Silverdale. This is Reverend Parker, head of our school board. Blackwell shook their hands with practiced politeness. Gentlemen, I'm honored but somewhat confused by this reception. I'm here on private business. We're aware of the nature of your business, Mr. Blackwell, Reverend Parker said evenly. Miss Andrews informed us of your impending arrival. A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwell's face before his expression smoothed into a cold smile. Ah, I see she's continued using her mother's maiden name, even here. I should clarify that her proper name is Miss Amelia Andrews, and she is my fiancée. Former fiancée, Gabe corrected, stepping forward. Miss Andrews has made it clear the engagement is terminated. Blackwell's gaze shifted to Gabe, assessing him with obvious disdain. And you are? Gabriel Rafferty. I see, Blackwell's tone suggested he didn't consider Gabe worth further acknowledgement. He turned back to the mayor. I appreciate your concern, gentlemen, but this is a private matter between Miss Andrews and myself. If you'll direct me to her location, I'll handle this with the discretion it deserves. Miss Andrews is our schoolteacher, Mayor Williams said firmly. A valued member of our community. Any matter concerning her welfare is of interest to this town. Blackwell's smile tightened. How charming, a frontier town rallying around a woman they barely know. Tell me, has she mentioned that she left Boston under a cloud of scandal, that she abandoned her father to face financial ruin alone, that she accepted valuable gifts from me which she has yet to return? We're aware of Miss Andrews's circumstances, Reverend Parker replied calmly. She has been forthcoming about her reasons for leaving Boston. For the first time, Blackwell seemed genuinely taken aback. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the group again, clearly reassessing the situation. I see she's managed to paint herself as the victim, he said finally, a role she plays convincingly. Nevertheless, I've traveled a considerable distance to speak with Miss Andrews personally, and I intend to do so. Where is she? Gabe stepped forward. I'll take you to her. But understand this, Blackwell, you'll speak to her with respect or you won't speak to her at all. Something dangerous flickered in Blackwell's eyes, a glimpse of the temper Amelia had described, quickly masked behind a veneer of civility. I had no idea my fiancée had acquired such devoted protectors in her brief time here. Lead on, Mr. Rafferty. As they walked toward the schoolhouse, flanked by the mayor and reverend, Gabe sensed several townspeople falling in behind them. By the time they reached the schoolyard, nearly 20 people had joined the procession. Blackwell glanced back at the growing crowd, his expression souring. Is this display of frontier solidarity really necessary? Seems so, Gabe replied shortly, mounting the steps to the schoolhouse door. He knocked once, then opened it. Amelia, he's here. She stood at the far end of the classroom, beside her desk. She wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out her eyes, and had arranged her honey-blonde hair in a simple but elegant style. Though her face was pale, her posture was straight, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Hello, Richard, she said, her voice remarkably steady. You've come a long way for nothing. Blackwell entered the schoolroom, ignoring Gabe and the others who followed. Amelia, you're looking well. Frontier life seems to agree with you. It does, she confirmed. I've found happiness here. How fortunate. Blackwell stopped a few feet from her, his tone softening to the charm Amelia had warned about. Your father misses you terribly. He's not well, Amelia. Your departure hit him hard. A flash of pain crossed her features. I'm sorry to hear that, but I made my position clear in the letter I left him. A letter filled with ridiculous accusations and girlish fears, Blackwell dismissed. Based on the lies of a disgruntled servant I was forced to dismiss. Is that really worth abandoning your father in his time of need? Gabe watched Amelia closely, concerned by the doubt that briefly clouded her expression. Blackwell was skilled, using family obligation and guilt with surgical precision. My father made his choice when he arranged our engagement without my consent, Amelia said finally. I've made mine. I won't return to Boston with you, Richard. Not now, not ever. Blackwell's facade of charm slipped, his voice hardening. You seem to be operating under the illusion that you have options, my dear. Let me be clear. You will return with me, or I will ensure that your reputation, and your father's, is utterly destroyed. Threats, Mr. Blackwell, Mayor Williams interjected, stepping forward. That's hardly the way to win a lady's affections. This doesn't concern you, Blackwell snapped, his composure cracking further. None of you understand what's at stake here. I understand perfectly, Amelia replied, her voice stronger now. You can't bear to be defied. You can't accept that I've chosen a life without you. It was never about affection, Richard. It was about ownership. Blackwell's face darkened with anger. You ungrateful little, he took a step toward her, only to find Gabe suddenly between them. That's far enough, Gabe said quietly. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other, the air between them charged with potential violence. Then Blackwell seemed to remember their audience and forced his features into a semblance of calm. You've clearly been influenced by these people, he said to Amelia as if Gabe were invisible. I understand, you were frightened, confused, you made a rash decision. But it's time to end this charade and return to the life you were meant for. This is the life I was meant for, Amelia replied simply. Teaching children, being part of a community that values me for myself, not as a social asset or a means to settle a debt. I've found purpose here, Richard, and something else. Her eyes flickered briefly to Gabe, something I never expected to find. Blackwell followed her gaze, his expression darkening as he understood. This. Cowboy, he laughed, the sound brittle and mocking. Oh, Amelia, how far you've fallen. No, Richard, she said softly. For the first time in my life, I'm standing exactly where I should be. The simple dignity of her response seemed to infuriate Blackwell more than any argument could have. His carefully maintained veneer cracked completely, revealing the ugliness beneath. You think this is over. You think hiding in this backwater protects you. His voice rose, control abandoning him entirely. I will ruin you, Amelia. I will ensure that no respectable school will ever employ you. I will see your father imprisoned for fraud. I will. That's enough, Reverend Parker interrupted, his tone uncharacteristically harsh. You've said quite enough, Mr. Blackwell. Indeed, Mayor Williams agreed. I think it's time you left our backwater, sir. The next stage departs at 4 o'clock. I suggest you be on it. Blackwell looked around at the assembled townspeople, seemingly registering for the first time how many witnesses had heard his outburst. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This isn't finished, he said to Amelia, his voice low but intense. You think you've won, but you haven't seen what I'm capable of when I'm crossed. Actually, Gabe said quietly, I think we just did. Something in his tone, perhaps the absolute certainty that he would protect Amelia regardless of cost, finally penetrated Blackwell's rage. The banker stepped back, straightening his jacket in a gesture of composure. We'll see, he said coldly. Then, with a final contemptuous glance at the gathered townspeople, he turned and strode from the schoolhouse. The moment he was gone, Amelia's legs seemed to give way. She sank into her chair, trembling violently. Gabe was at her side instantly, one hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. He won't give up, she whispered. That wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Perhaps, Reverend Parker said, approaching her desk, but he now knows you're not alone. That changes the equation considerably. The Reverend's right, Mrs. Cooper added, stepping forward from the crowd. That man may have power in Boston, but he's a long way from Boston now. As the townspeople voiced their agreement, offering support and reassurance, Gabe watched Amelia's expression gradually shift from fear to cautious hope. The confrontation had shaken her, but it had also shown her something important. The community she'd feared would reject her for her deception had instead rallied around her in her moment of need. Thank you, she said finally, addressing everyone gathered in the schoolroom. I don't know what to say except, thank you. As the crowd slowly dispersed, discussing the drama they just witnessed in excited tones, Gabe remained at Amelia's side. Mayor Williams and Reverend Parker stayed as well, concerned about Blackwell's parting threat. I don't trust him to leave quietly, the mayor said. Rafferty, perhaps you should stay in town until we're certain he's departed on the afternoon stage. I wasn't planning to leave her side, Gabe confirmed, his hand still resting protectively on Amelia's shoulder. Good man, Reverend Parker approved. Miss Andrews, is there anything else we should know about this individual? Anything that might help us anticipate his next move. Amelia considered the question carefully. Richard values his reputation above all else. Public embarrassment is intolerable to him. I think that's our strongest defense. The more people who witness his behavior, the more constrained he'll be. Then we'll ensure he's not given private access to you, the mayor decided. Parker and I will inform Sheriff Davies of the situation. He'll keep an eye on your visitor until he departs. After the officials left, Gabe knelt beside Amelia's chair, taking her trembling hands in his. You were magnificent, he told her softly. Standing up to him like that. I was terrified, she admitted. I still am. The look in his eyes when he left. Gabe, I've seen it before. He's not finished. Neither are we, Gabe assured her. I won't leave you alone, Amelia. Not for a moment. She managed a wan smile, my protector. Something more than that, I hope, he said seriously, meeting her eyes. When you told Blackwell you'd found something unexpected here. Did you mean what I think you meant? Color rose in her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, though perhaps this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Gabe interrupted gently. Life's too uncertain to waste it being cautious with our hearts. I've spent years keeping people at a distance, convinced it was safer that way. Then you came along and proved me wrong. Gabe, I love you, Amelia Andrews, he said simply. I think I started falling for you that first day, despite all my determination not to. And now, knowing everything, your past, your fears, your courage, I love you even more. Tears welled in her green eyes. How can you be so certain? We've known each other such a short time. Some things don't need time, he replied, just clarity, and I've never been clearer about anything in my life. A tear slipped down her cheek. I love you too, she whispered, so much that it terrifies me. Loving someone means having something precious to lose. Or something precious to fight for, Gabe countered, wiping away her tear with gentle fingers. And I'm prepared to fight for you, Amelia. For us. He leaned forward then, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion he felt. She responded in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck as if she never wanted to let go. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Gabe pressed his forehead against hers. "We'll get through this," he promised, "together." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "Together." As Gabe helped Amelia collect her things, preparing to escort her to the cafe for a late lunch, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street, Richard Blackwell, his face contorted with rage as he observed their intimate exchange through the schoolhouse window. The afternoon dragged with excruciating slowness. Gabe accompanied Amelia to the cafe, then to the mercantile where she made a pretense of selecting supplies, then back to her quarters to prepare for the next day's lessons. Throughout they caught occasional glimpses of Blackwell moving about town, speaking to various citizens, his manner outwardly cordial though his eyes remained cold. "What is he doing?" Amelia wondered, watching through her window as Blackwell engaged Mrs. Holloway in conversation outside the boarding house. Why isn't he preparing to leave on the stage? "Learning what he can," Gabe surmised, his expression grim, gathering ammunition. By 3:30, Sheriff Davies appeared at Amelia's door, his weathered face apologetic. "Miss Andrews, I hate to bother you, but there's been a development. Your visitor has lodged a formal complaint with my office." "A complaint?" Amelia echoed, bewildered. "What kind of complaint?" "He claims you absconded with valuable property belonging to him, specifically, jewelry he gifted to you during your engagement." Davies shifted uncomfortably. "He's demanding its return before he departs." Gabe's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. Even if there were such gifts, they were given freely." "Actually," Amelia interjected quietly, "he's right. He did give me several pieces of jewelry, including a rather valuable diamond ring. I left them all behind when I fled, in a box on his desk with a note explicitly returning them." "He claims otherwise," Davies said. "Says the box was empty when he found it. His word against yours, I'm afraid." "And you believe him?" Gabe demanded, anger evident in his tone. "What I believe isn't relevant," the sheriff replied calmly. "He's threatened to bring charges of theft unless the items are returned or compensation provided. He's quite determined." "Of course he is," Amelia said bitterly. "He's found a way to force me to see him again on his terms." Gabe placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to see him at all. I can handle this." "No," Amelia said firmly. "I won't hide while he makes these accusations. I'll face him, but not alone." She looked at the sheriff. "Where is he now?" "Waiting at my office. The stage leaves in 25 minutes. Amelia straightened her shoulders, gathering her courage. "Then let's not keep him waiting." Despite Gabe's protests, Amelia insisted on walking to the sheriff's office. "Running and hiding is what he expects," she explained. "It's what gives him power. I won't do it anymore." Blackwell was seated in a chair across from the sheriff's desk when they entered, looking entirely too comfortable for a man about to depart. He rose smoothly at their entrance, his expression a study in false concern. "Amelia, I'm truly sorry it's come to this. If you had simply agreed to speak with me privately, we could have resolved this matter discreetly." "There's nothing to resolve, Richard," she replied evenly. "I returned your gifts before I left Boston. If they're missing, perhaps you should question your household staff." A flash of anger crossed his face before he composed himself. A convenient accusation when none of them are present to defend themselves. "The fact remains that the items, valued at over $3,000, are gone. Either you return them or I will be forced to press charges." "You'd never do it," Gabe said flatly. "A public court case would reveal too much about your own conduct. Your precious reputation wouldn't survive it." Blackwell's smile was cold. "You underestimate the sympathy afforded to a man betrayed by his fiancée. Particularly when that fiancée fled to the frontier and took up with the first cowboy she encountered." Before Gabe could respond to the deliberate provocation, the door to the sheriff's office opened, admitting Mayor Williams and Reverend Parker. Their arrival clearly surprised Blackwell, who had not expected an audience for this confrontation. "Gentlemen," he acknowledged stiffly, "I believe this is a private matter." "Not in my town," the mayor replied firmly. "Sheriff Davies informed us of your accusation against Miss Andrews. As mayor, I have an interest in any legal proceedings involving our citizens." And as Miss Andrews' spiritual advisor, I felt my presence might be beneficial, Reverend Parker added, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. Blackwell's confident demeanor faltered slightly at this united front. He turned back to Amelia, visibly reassessing his strategy. I have no desire to cause a scandal, Amelia. I'm simply seeking the return of property that rightfully belongs to me. Surely you can understand that. I understand exactly what you're doing, Richard, Amelia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're attempting to force my compliance through legal threats, just as you've done to others in the past. It won't work. It already has worked, he countered smoothly. You're here, aren't you? Speaking with me as I wanted. The smug satisfaction in his voice sent a chill through Amelia. He was right, even in this small way. He had manipulated the situation to his advantage, forcing a private meeting despite the community's efforts to prevent it. Let's be clear about one thing, Sheriff Davies interjected, his expression hard beneath his bushy mustache. Miss Andrews isn't alone here. Whatever conversation you're having, it's happening with witnesses. Blackwell's jaw tightened fractionally, but he recovered quickly. Of course, I have nothing to hide. He turned back to Amelia, his voice softening to the persuasive tone she remembered all too well. Amelia, be reasonable. You know the gifts were substantial. The diamond ring alone was worth over $1,000. I'm not asking for their return, merely adequate compensation. Which I don't have, Amelia said flatly, as you well know. Ah, but you could return to Boston with me, as I originally proposed. Once we're married, the issue becomes moot. His eyes glittered with triumph. It's a simple solution to an unfortunate situation. Before Amelia could respond, Gabe stepped forward, his patience clearly at an end. There's another solution. How much? Blackwell raised an eyebrow. Pardon me. How much for you to drop this charade and leave on today's stage? Gabe clarified, his voice dangerously calm. Name your price. Gabe, no, Amelia protested, but he silenced her with a gentle hand on her arm. I doubt you could meet my price, Cowboy, Blackwell said dismissively. We're talking about thousands of dollars. I have money, Gabe said, savings, enough to make this go away. Amelia stared at him in shock. She knew Gabe had been saving for years to buy his own ranch someday. The thought of him sacrificing that dream to free her from Blackwell's machinations was overwhelming. Gabe, you can't, she whispered. Your land. Land can wait, he replied quietly. Some things are more important. Blackwell watched this exchange with calculated interest. How touching, the cowboy willing to sacrifice his meager fortune for love. His tone made the sentiment sound pathetic rather than noble. Unfortunately, Mr. Rafferty, I'm not interested in your money. My concern is for Amelia's welfare and her rightful place in Boston society. No, your concern is for your wounded pride, Reverend Parker interjected unexpectedly. You cannot bear that a woman chose freedom over the cage you constructed for her. Blackwell's composure slipped at the direct accusation. You know nothing about me, Reverend. I know enough, Parker replied evenly. I know that a man who truly loved a woman would wish for her happiness, even if it didn't include him. I know that threats and coercion are tools of control, not affection. Spare me your frontier moralizing, Blackwell snapped. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with us, Mayor Williams countered. Miss Andrews is part of our community now. We protect our own. The clock on the sheriff's wall chimed 4:45, a reminder that the stage would soon depart. Blackwell glanced at it, then back at Amelia, his expression calculating. It seems I've underestimated the attachment these people have formed to you, he conceded, his tone suggesting he found it bizarre rather than admirable. Very well, I'll depart on today's stage, as planned. Relief flooded Amelia, though she remained wary of his too-easy capitulation, and the accusation of theft. Consider it withdrawn for now. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But this isn't over, Amelia. Boston isn't as far away as you might think. Your father still needs you, and I am not a man who accepts defeat easily. Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwell? Sheriff Davies asked bluntly. Merely an observation, Sheriff. Blackwell reached for his hat, placed it precisely on his head. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a stage to catch. As he moved toward the door, he paused beside Amelia, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He can't protect you forever. Sooner or later, you'll learn that your place is with me, one way or another. Gabe stepped between them, his expression leaving no doubt about his willingness to enforce the separation physically, if necessary. Blackwell merely smiled, tipped his hat mockingly, and departed. The tension in the room eased palpably with his exit. Sheriff Davies moved to the window, watching as Blackwell crossed the street toward the waiting stagecoach. "I'll make sure he actually boards," Davies said, donning his own hat, "and I'll telegraph the next town to confirm he continues eastward." After the sheriff left, Mayor Williams turned to Amelia with a sympathetic expression. "Are you all right, Miss Andrews? That was a trying ordeal." "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly, "just relieved it's over." "I'm not certain it is over," Reverend Parker said soberly. "Men like Blackwell don't surrender easily. His pride has been wounded publicly, a dangerous combination." "What more can he do?" Gabe asked. "He has no legal claim on Amelia." "No authority here." "Perhaps not legally," the Reverend acknowledged, "but he struck me as a man with resources and determination. I would advise vigilance in the coming weeks." Through the window, they could see Blackwell boarding the stage, his movements precise and unhurried. There was nothing in his demeanor to suggest a man who had been defeated. Rather, he carried himself with the confidence of someone merely adjusting his strategy. As the stagecoach pulled away from the hotel, disappearing down the road that led east toward Denver, Amelia felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the immediate confrontation had ended, gratitude for the support of Gabe and the townspeople, but also a persistent unease that whispered this was merely the eye of the storm, not its conclusion. "Thank you all for your support," she said sincerely, turning to the men who had stood with her. "I don't know how to properly express my gratitude." "No thanks necessary," Mayor Williams assured her. "Though I must say I admire your composure throughout this difficult situation. You've proven yourself a woman of remarkable character, Miss Andrews." The praise, coming after months of fearing discovery and rejection, brought unexpected tears to Amelia's eyes. "That means more than you can know," she managed. After the mayor and Reverend departed with final words of encouragement, Gabe and Amelia left the sheriff's office together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as they walked slowly toward the schoolhouse. "Did you really mean it?" Amelia asked suddenly, "about giving him your savings?" Gabe nodded, his expression serious. "Every cent, if it would have rid us of him." "Your dream of your own ranch." "Dreams change," he interrupted gently, "or rather they expand to include more important things." He took her hand, unconcerned about the public display. "I meant what I said earlier, Amelia. I love you. Land, cattle, money, none of it matters if you're not sharing it with me." The simple, heartfelt declaration washed over her like a healing balm. For so long, Amelia had felt unworthy of such devotion, damaged by her father's betrayal, tainted by her association with Blackwell, diminished by the lies she'd told to survive. Yet here was this good, honorable man offering his heart to her without reservation. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "That's not for you to decide," he replied with the hint of a smile. "Besides, I think we deserve each other, two people who have been alone too long, finally finding home in each other." As they reached her door, Amelia turned to face him fully. "Do you really believe he's gone for good?" Gabe considered the question honestly. "No," he admitted finally. "A man like that doesn't give up so easily, but whatever comes next, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore, Amelia. Remember that." He kissed her then, a gentle promise sealed with the warmth of his lips on hers. And for that moment at least, Amelia allowed herself to believe that love might indeed be stronger than fear, that the home she'd found in Gabe's heart and in the community of Silverdale might be sturdy enough to withstand whatever storms lay ahead. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold to Silverdale, transforming the frontier town into a landscape of white frosted buildings and smoke curling from every chimney. As Christmas approached, the initial fears about Richard Blackwell's return gradually faded. Sheriff Davies had confirmed his departure eastward, and no further word had come from Boston. Slowly, Amelia began to relax into her new reality, a life built on truth rather than deception, strengthened by the community's acceptance and Gabe's unwavering love. The school term ended for the holiday break, and preparations for Christmas festivities occupied everyone's attention. On the Saturday before Christmas, Gabe arrived at Amelia's quarters earlier than usual, his expression both nervous and determined. She welcomed him with a smile, noting he wore his best clothes despite the freezing weather. "You look very handsome today," she remarked, helping him remove his heavy coat. "Special occasion." "Might be," he replied cryptically, brushing snow from his hat before setting it aside. "Depends on how the day goes." Intrigued by his mysterious manner, Amelia served the coffee she'd prepared, watching as Gabe paced her small sitting area rather than taking his usual seat. "Is everything all right?" she asked finally. "You seem unsettled." He stopped pacing, turning to face her with sudden resolution. "I need to show you something. Will you come with me?" "Now it's freezing outside." "I've brought the sleigh from the Circle R," he explained. "Plenty of blankets." "It's not far." Curious despite her reservations about the weather, Amelia agreed. Soon they were gliding across the snow-covered landscape in the ranch's small cutter sleigh, the horses' harness bells jingling merrily in the crisp air. Gabe guided them away from town, following the creek they'd walked beside so often in warmer weather. "Where are we going?" Amelia asked, nestled close to him beneath heavy buffalo robes. "You'll see," was all he would say, a small smile playing at his lips. About 2 miles from town, Gabe turned the sleigh onto a less traveled track that wound through a stand of pine trees. As they emerged from the trees, Amelia gasped in surprise. Before them lay a small valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides with the creek running along its edge. In the center stood a cabin newly built, judging by the fresh-cut timber, with smoke rising cheerfully from its stone chimney. "Gabe, what is this place?" she asked, though a suspicion was already forming in her mind. "My land," he said simply, bringing the sleigh to a halt before the cabin. "Bought it last month from old Jim Peterson." He never developed it, just held on to it for years. "Your land," she repeated, trying to absorb this unexpected revelation. "You never mentioned." "Wanted it to be a surprise," he explained, helping her down from the sleigh. "Come inside. It's warmer there." The cabin interior was simple but well crafted, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what Amelia presumed were bedrooms. A fire burned welcomingly in the hearth, and to her surprise, the room was furnished with a table, chairs, and even a small sofa covered in a colorful quilt. "Henry Milton helped me with the furniture," Gabe explained, noting her surprise. "Martha contributed the quilt and some kitchen items." "It's wonderful," Amelia said sincerely, turning slowly to take in every detail. "But I don't understand. You said your savings." "I didn't use all of them," he admitted. "The land was less expensive than I'd anticipated, and I did most of the building myself, with help from some of the hands at the Circle R." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I started it before Blackwell arrived. Before I knew everything about your past, but I finished it after, Amelia, knowing exactly who you are and what you've been through." The significance of his words wasn't lost on her. "You built this even knowing the complications I bring with me." "I built it especially because of those complications," he corrected gently, "because I wanted you to have a safe place. A home that's yours by right, not by someone else's charity or conditional acceptance." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes at the profound thoughtfulness of his gift. "Oh, Gabe." "There's more," he said, his voice growing husky with emotion. He took her hand, leading her to the cabin's front window. "Look there, about a quarter-mile down the valley." Amelia gazed in the direction he indicated, seeing cleared land and what appeared to be the foundation of another structure. "What is it?" "The school," Gabe said simply, "or it will be come spring, big enough for 30 students with proper desks and a real bell tower. The town council approved it last week." This valley's halfway between Silverdale and 3 outlying ranches with school-age children. Makes more sense than having them travel all the way to town. Amelia turned to him in astonishment. "A new school." "Here." He nodded, his blue eyes intent on her face. "With living quarters for the teacher, though she won't need them if—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "If she chooses to live here with me." The full import of his words finally registered, and Amelia's heart began to race. "Gabe, are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Amelia Andrews," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I'm asking you to build a life with me in this valley, to teach in that school. To make this cabin a home, our home. Joy pure and overwhelming swept through Amelia. This man, this remarkable man who had saved her in more ways than she could count, was offering her everything she'd ever dreamed of but never believed she could have. Love, security, purpose, a place to truly belong. Yes, she whispered, tears spilling freely now. Yes, I'll marry you, yes to everything. Gabe's face transformed with happiness. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. It